Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Amber and this is Fundy Freed. Before we get started today, if you like what I'm doing, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss anything. We get new stuff out every Friday and shorts throughout the week. And today we have a very special guest, my good friend that I have not yet met in person, but he's still pretty awesome. Mr. AC, he and I met about a year ago now on like a podcast, YouTube or not YouTube page, a Facebook page, and I had been on his podcast, In the Blood and What I Like About You. Those two are the ones I was on. And he also has a podcast called Turn Up the AC, which is him just talking and sharing his thoughts and everything that's going on. So I'm really excited to have you here, AC. Thanks for coming on with me today.
No, it's nice being on the other side of things for once. I feel like I've had you at a disadvantage twice now.
You have. I was in the hot seat. Now the tables have turned. So
Yeah, I don't even know what you're going to do to me now. I'm getting a little afraid.
you should be. I'm a bit of a sadist, so
Okay,
just
that's good. I'm
kidding.
a bit of a masochist, so this balances out nicely.
Will work out really well.
I'll apologize in advance to your listeners for what's about to happen.
Right. Well, this might have to go on a special page. So let's start from the beginning of AC. What do you remember as like the starting point of like your Christian journey? And then kind of take us down that road.
What started off my Christianity, you mean?
Yeah, what started your Christianity? Were you raised into Christianity? Were you born into it?
I was effectively born into it. For your American listeners, I feel like I need to clear up this one point because it seems to be one of these weird things that Americans and Canadians never seem to agree on. In Canada, Baptists are among the most like moderate, easygoing, like super chill denominations out there. And I've noticed that south of the border, it tends to be a bit different most of the time. So when I
Yes.
say I was born into a family that were like practicing Baptists, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. Like they didn't get crazy until like long after the fact. But at the time when I came on the scene, it's like, yeah, the family went to this really cute little like neighborhood Baptist church where everything was wonderful. Like some of my earliest memories, actually, in fact, I would say my very earliest memory is being in Sunday school in the basement of that church. And you probably know that song, the Bible. Yes, that's the
Yes.
book for me. And my first memory is putting my Bible down on the floor, stepping up on top of it and singing, I stand up tall in the word of God. And just,
I love that.
it was such a wonderful feel good experience. And, you know, I sometimes feel like if my family had stuck with that kind of Christianity, I may have actually like remained a Christian to this day. But as is often the case, the story did start taking some turns.
Yes.
And that happy, wonderful first memory I had was not indicative of the types of memories that were to come. When I hit about, I would say maybe like 6.5, 7 years old, my my dad had gone through kind of like a painful estrangement from his family, which had all hinged around my dad getting into some business dealings with a fairly shady character, the result of which being that my father was bankrupted. So overnight, we went from being quite an affluent family to having literally nothing. And in an effort to save the family home, my dad had signed the deed of the home over to his father for $1, with the understanding that his father would continue making the mortgage payments.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, my dad was giving his dad the money for the monthlies, and his dad was spending money on renovating his own home.
Oh
And we
no.
found out that that the bank had foreclosed on the home when we came home one day, and there was a for sale sign on the front lawn. So Needless to
That's
say,
just a lot.
yeah, this caused like some fairly extreme family strain. The
Yes.
result of which my dad saying, you know what, we're out of here. Like, I just can't do this. We moved to an entirely different city and in Canada. Like, we moved from Langley, British Columbia to Calgary, Alberta, and basically one of those fresh start kind of things. And one of the first things that had changed when we arrived in Calgary is I guess my dad was looking for something meaningful, something that would get his hopes up, something that would empower him because he'd been so beaten down. And he crossed paths with some Pentecostals.
Mm.
And things like took a very, very ugly turn, like pretty much overnight. Um,
Was it
sorry,
just the
it's like
belief
right now
system?
I'm
No.
go ahead with your question.
No, 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 you're good. So was it just the belief system? Was it so dogmatic that it literally shifted the whole family into like that good, happy place that you were with the Baptists into like this dogmatic, legalistic state?
It was like it wasn't even like the same faith, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of people that like are either sheltered in a certain denomination or people perhaps that have grown up outside of the faith, they tend to look at Christianity as like this one big homogenous mass of like-minded believers, when in actuality, when you go from one denomination to the next, while certain key phrases and key characters may be very similar, the actual beliefs and practices are drastically different to the point where these may as well be completely different religions.
Right.
And as was certainly the case between like a fairly like moderate brand of Baptist to like the extreme practice of like what I would refer to like at this point like cutting edge Pentecostalism. Like these people were like going as far out there as humanly possible. And when you grow up kind of like experiencing the wooden pew and the sweet little granny sitting next to you with a doily on her Bible, to some crazy person like like hooga booga speaking in tongues, dancing,
Yes.
and like people with demons like rolling around on the floor and like literally frothing at the mouth, like this is scary shit for sorry, I don't know if I
Yeah,
can swear
that's
on your
really
show.
traumatizing. It's like really
It's
traumatizing.
terrifying for a small child.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't like, this is where like things really started to change because like again, like referring back to like very, very early childhood. I know like this Pentecostal thing is still technically in early childhood, right? But if
Right.
I look at like the earlier chapter of early childhood, it was questions were welcomed. My
Mm-hmm.
the church environment, the family environment, people encouraged, like the naturally inquisitive nature of children. There's no stupid questions, like these
Mm-hmm.
Bible stories, whether you believe them or don't believe them, they can be like kind of like fantastic in nature and difficult for a logical mind to grasp.
Right.
And so when I would ask certain questions, in like Baptist Sunday school, like talking about the story with Balaam's donkey, for example, like, well, I've
Mm-hmm.
never seen a donkey talk. Well, how could that happen? And they would like patiently sit down with me and say, well, the spirit of God came upon the donkey and blah blah blah, and this is just a testament to like how powerful God is. And it's like, okay, my young mind could grasp that.
Right.
But when I would ask similarly innocent and inquisitive questions in the Pentecostal Sunday school, it was treated as though I were possessed by like demons. It's blasphemous, it's heretical
Mm-hmm.
to think or ask these certain things. Like these are indications that you've got sin in your life, and like that's kind of heavy to dump on a 7-year-old. It's like, I'm barely comfortable with the concept of sin, and you're telling me I'm so like riddled with it, like I need a fucking like a freaking exorcism. Like, come
Right.
on.
I was just asking about the 2x2 with Noah's Ark. I
Right.
wasn't trying to conjure anything up.
And like these
But
are good questions. It's like, how do all these
mhm.
animals fit on like a boat? What did they eat? Like, how do the predators and the prey happily coexist? Like they're not going to be satisfied with manna raining down from the ceiling. I can tell you that much.
Right.
So like, but
It's
yeah,
just
I like
natural
to this day, I
questions.
don't think that I needed an exorcism for asking these questions.
No, absolutely not. But like that extremism tends to, like, any type of critical thinking becomes demonic because it challenges that status quo. And so it's automatically the devil. We need to get the devil out because you can't think for yourself kind of mentality.
100%. Yeah.
Hmm.
No, and like again, when you're dealing with young children, I mean, they don't need to hear "trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding." It's like we rely on our own understanding in every area of life, except church. You
Yes.
can't get a kid to like turn off a natural instinct. In fact, like turning off natural instincts seem to be the name of the game. I don't know about the denomination you grew up in, but like in the Pentecostal church for sure, literally anything to do with a natural impulse was inherently evil because people are
Yes.
inherently evil. You're born sinful, you fall short of the glory of God, all this other stuff.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, like, even as a small child, is like, I'm not broken or flawed. Like, there's like, I'm just like a normal kid. Like, why am I being punished for being normal?
Right.
And they kind of like started training me to like punish myself for being normal. I would have a stray thought and be like, no, get thee behind me, Satan. It's like a little kid doesn't need to be
Right.
policing their idle thoughts. Like, these
Hmm.
things happen, and it's not always the devil or God whispering in the ear. Sometimes it's just you in your head. That's where you live,
Yes.
you know?
Yes,
Sorry, I'm getting
exactly.
all
It's that
worked up.
internal. No, 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 no. I'm right there with you. It's like that internal monologue. Like we were so trained to not listen to that internal monologue. So that means not only just critical thinking is out the window, but also preservation, like boundaries or autonomy, all and consent. All of these things are just thrown out the window because any type of critical thought is sinful because you are
Hmm.
innately sinful. And it was the job then of the parents to then break that spirit and that rebellious nature out of you. So we were forced into these cookie cutter mindsets that were just mentally just detrimental. Like it destroyed
Hmm.
mental health. And so I'm right there with you. I understand that's where I was too. It was really traumatic
No,
to
and brutal.
it
No,
is
you'd
it is
mentioned
brutal.
mental health, and like that was one of the like things that like I still struggle with to this day. Like when I look at how my kids have grown up, I've gotten them every kind of support that was available. I've not parented from my experience of being parented. Like I've had to reinvent the wheel in a lot of ways, and I look especially with my oldest. Like the two of us are wired like almost identically. It would be like if you had like two identical computers, you program them differently. And you see, while one of these is like super functional, the other one's riddled with viruses. Like I'm the one that's riddled with viruses, and my kid is a fantastic, functional, well-adjusted, happy human being who's like super productive. Like I'm thinking, holy crap! Like if I had gotten Ritalin instead of an exorcism in grade 5, maybe I would have turned out awesome too. Like if I had
Yeah.
gotten mental health support, a little bit of counseling instead of prayer and casting out demons and judgment and like just negativity fed into me, maybe I wouldn't be so anxious now. Like I look at like when because my oldest, he's like 20 now. So when he comes to
Hmm.
visit like from a different city, I just look at simple things like morning routine. Like, and one of the things that hits me the hardest is like this kid can like put on his socks and shoes. And like I don't mean like, wow, I'm proud because he can tie his shoes and count by twos, all this other crap.
Right.
What I mean is like I am so effed up in the head mentally from like a difficult childhood that like I put on my first sock. I will hold my second sock sometimes for 45 minutes while I bawl my eyes out because I can't bring myself to put my foot into it. And like, how do I unravel this ball that this
Yeah.
steady diet? I mean, I turned 50 like last month, which like
Hmm.
I'm still in disbelief about that because I live my life mentally from the ages of like 6 to 10. I can't escape that. I look in the mirror and
Hmm.
it's like, who's this old guy looking back at me? Because I'm like a scared, abused little kid.
Hmm. I
This may be
understand.
one of those times where you got to rein me back because like I'm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can understand that. Like it, I personally, with just my own childhood trauma that way, I've talked about with you before. Like I have been mentally stuck at certain ages. Like it's like, and if something triggers me, my brain it automatically goes back to be I'm this scared 12-year-old, or I'm this scared 9-year-old, and like I curl up into like this, and I just shrink. But with my own children and having all girls, I'm like, I'm not having them live like this. This is not how they're going to be raised. And so they're growing up to be these mouthy, independent, strong women. And they're doing these things that I would be petrified to do, even now as an adult sometimes, like speaking my mind, standing up for myself, setting strong boundaries. And I'm just like, they're functional, they're healthy. Is this what it would have been like for me? Like
Yeah.
it's encouraging to see that in our offspring, but it also at the same time it makes me sad because of what I missed out on, how I could have possibly lived my life in comparison to the trauma riddled brain and like the dissociative amnesia that makes me forget everything if I get stressed out. It's this crazy thing, but I think it's it stands to a testament to us that we've put a stop to it and changed it for our kids. So our kids are not having to deal with that. We're just, you know, we just deal with our own mess in our own heads. And our kids are hopefully getting away, not having to deal with that type of mindset at all.
No, I think that's like one of the most frustrating things for me too. Is like I spent a lot of years like making excuses for my parents, thinking, okay, well, they're doing the best that they could. They didn't know any better. Kids don't come with a manual, blah, blah, blah. Their intentions were good. But you know what? All those same statements are true about me. And I didn't make the same choices they did. I grew up
Mm-hmm.
in the same environment. I had the same programming. I was abused in the same ways, physically, emotionally, psychologically. And my kids, like, abuse is such a foreign concept to them. Like, when they ask me about childhood and I tell them certain stories, like, they laugh because the concept of a father hitting a child is so
Mm-hmm.
outlandish and ridiculous to them. It's like they think I've got to be pulling their leg. And there's that little kernel inside of me that gets frustrated. It's like, no, this is my story. It's true. But then the rest of me is like, you know what? Let them have this. I love that they don't believe me on this, because that tells me that
Yes.
like I've done an awesome job.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I see that with my own kids because they'll ask me stuff about my childhood, and I'll just give them little bits and pieces of stories here and there, and they're just like they literally cannot comprehend that level. I mean, even this, I don't even like go into gory details with them, but like they don't understand that level of depravity in humans because
Yeah.
they don't live that. And I'm happy that they don't have that same fear and that same trauma that I had growing up. And to me, they're going to have a much better chance of success and having a much happier life than, I mean, and I'm pretty happy now. I'm happy where I'm at now. But I mean, it took many years, as you understand, many years to even get to the point that we're at now.
Yeah.
And they're not having to do that. Like I have two kids in therapy. I have one that's on medicine because she just struggles with things, and I'm like, man, I needed a therapist at 9. I needed a therapist at 12. Like I really needed like all these tools that I didn't even know was possible to have until I was like in my mid 20s. And so they're getting this chance that I never had, and it's something to be proud of, I think, because we're breaking that curse, that cycle of that depravity that we grew up with, because it was just evil. It was just horrific and evil. And did your family just stay stuck in the Pentecostal world just from that point forward? Is that where you guys stayed?
Oh yeah. And it was rough because I mean, I think the hardest shift for me, as much as it was different, like observing like differences in like the way a Sunday service went. I mean, I should say service is, because with the Pentecostals, I mean, once just isn't enough. You got, you
Right.
know, the morning, Sunday
Morning,
morning,
evening.
Sunday evening, like Wednesday night, Friday night,
Yes.
Saturday morning, and on top of it, we went to Christian school in the church basement. So
Yes. You had like
it
all
was.
the exposure. It was just oversaturation.
Well, then, like to this day, like I'll have conversations with like Christians of like, "Wow, you're an atheist. How do you know so much about the Bible?" It's like, well, you know, I wasn't like an atheist my whole life. There was a long stretch where, by choice or by force, I took this stuff very seriously. But
Hmm.
anyways, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself.
No, you're
What I
good.
was going to say is like one of the hardest changes that I had dealt with was the change in my father, because I mean when he was like a Baptist, I mean he was like the cool fun like Sunday school leader. Like he wore the big straw cowboy hat. He nicknamed himself
Mhm.
Big Cheese, which was written across the front. The children loved him. You know,
Yeah.
there was Mr. Bergen. Everybody loved him. And then we go to the Pentecostal church, and his worldview had shifted so drastically. It was like, spare the rod and spoil the child weren't like things that were taken as like helpful metaphors. It was like, a literal rod became very necessary. And
Hmm.
up until a certain point, I mean, it's, like corporal punishment was like, I think, just the norm. I mean, I was born in 1973. I mean, different time, right? Parents still spanked their children, and that was socially acceptable. I mean, now
Hmm.
it's not the case, but
Yeah.
I got used to, getting whacked with like a broad belt, which was like a noisy thing, but not a terribly painful thing. Or they had this, it looked like one of those light wooden paint stir sticks that had like heat
Yes.
for the seat painted on it, which again, it was a noisemaker, but it didn't really hurt. Then when we had first moved to Calgary, I had gotten in trouble for a fairly minor infraction, and I didn't understand what was happening because my father, who normally would have like given me a stern look and maybe a fast smack, he grabbed me by the upper arm and like half dragged, half carried me out to the garage and took a metal rod and proceeded to like mercilessly beat me with it.
Hmm.
And of course there's a physical pain. I mean, like, whatever. You tune that
Right.
out after a certain point, but the psychological trauma, the confusion, I mean, when I drive past that house now, I mean, again, I'm like a 50-year-old man. I burst into tears. I'm right back there in that garage
Yeah.
getting beaten by what should have been my loving father. And,
Yeah.
it wasn't just like that one time. That was just the first time,
Yeah.
and those kind of beatings, they lasted until I was like the better part of like 14, 15 years old. And like, I'm a big guy. I'm well, I'll use like American measurements. I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall, 190 centimeters for the rest of the world. Um,
Yeah, we have to
I'm
be
sick.
different down here.
Okay, like I'm 6'4". I was like fairly short at like 14, 15. I was only 6'3" back then. My dad was an average height guy. Like, I was like a full head taller than him, and here's this guy coming at me at that age and like trying to whip me. And that's when I finally realized, you know what? Screw this guy. I could literally pick him up and throw him. I don't have to get beaten anymore. And it was only then when all that stopped. But I mean, the
Yeah.
attitude was still the same. It was still like, oh, you still need like deliverance. You're still possessed. You're still evil. You're still sinful. You're still like just a disgusting example of life in every imaginable sense, because that's just what humans are without Jesus. And
Right.
as ugly as
It's
that message was, I totally bought into it, you know?
yeah. I mean, you and me both. I mean, I was in there hook, line, and sinker too. And um it's crazy because my dad actually used a Mexican belt. We called it the Mexican belt because it was like a leather belt with a Mexican scene like all like engraved all around it. And he would snap the belt before he would then beat us with the belts. And
Oof.
even now, like my kids will like have their belt or something like that'll snap, and instantly my brain is taken back, and the shit's being beat out of me, and I'm like crying just because my kid just did something innocent over here in the corner, and I'm like, oh my god, it's like it's so hard. It's so hard
Mm-hmm.
to like like I don't know, just comprehend that level of in their mind righteous discipline, which really was just complete child abuse. And really, and they were taught that, at least my parents were taught, if they didn't do this, they were wrong and they were sinful, and I was going to
Mm-hmm.
go to hell because they were not punishing me properly. And my youngest brother had ADD, and my dad would drag him across the floor and or ADHD and drag him across the floor and beat the snot out of him because of his he just couldn't help it. He couldn't sit still.
Sounds like you
And
needed like some meds and a bit of therapy and some
he
patience.
he did. Yeah, and that's what it was. And now my mom's older and she divorced him, and she has a little girl now who has like who's on the spectrum and is special needs in certain ways, and she's taken a totally different approach since she left that world. And this kid is thriving. Like
Hmm.
she has fetal alcohol syndrome, and she wasn't supposed to be as far advanced as she was. She was supposed to stay like 2 or 3 years behind her whole life. And she's 13 now, and she's 1 year behind because my mom put time and love and therapy and medication and all the things that she
Wow.
needed into her. And it's just the vast contrast between my childhood and what she's getting, and how she's turning out in comparison to my brothers and I. It's just fascinating. And I didn't mean to like ramble over your story. It just triggered like some memories
No,
in
no,
me
I,
too.
I get
So
it, and it's like it's hard when you like for me. I didn't like see my parents like raise other kids per se, but I mean when grandkids started coming along, seeing the different side of them, it's like these people were capable of being decent humans. They still were members of the same kind of like cultish religion,
mhm.
yet somehow they figure out how to turn it off with the grandkids. Like, why can't you turn it off with me? Like, I was good too. I deserved
Right,
it.
right.
You know, geez, and
And
then, like it's so hard. Like, there's so many layers to the onion. It's like when you talk about your kid snapping the belt. I mean, it just popped into my head that at some point my dad switched from like the thin metal rod to like the plastic rods, like the ones from Venetian blinds they use for adjusting the tilt, whatever.
yes. Oh, those hurt. Oh, those hurt.
Oh, they sure do. But
They hurt
like
so
I
bad.
was remembering once, I think I was maybe like 39, 40 years old, and I was thinking about the sound that the thing made coming through the air, that like swishing sound. And it occurred to me, it's like, I don't know, like how hard did my dad have to hit me to make that sound? I don't know, like it seemed like a simple question to ask.
Right, right.
So I took the rod down off of the blinds in our new house that my wife at the time and I had moved into, and I just sort of like hit the bed, like the mattress with it, and it's like that
Hmm.
wasn't the swishing sound. I kept hitting harder and harder, and it's like I could not get that sound until like I was hitting so hard that I was like wrenching my shoulder and my feet were just about leaving the ground. It's like
Oh,
that's when it occurred to
right,
me, my dad wasn't a bit rough, he was an abusive piece of crap. Like,
right, right,
it's like grown-ups have enough of a size and strength advantage over children. They don't need to pick up a weapon, and if they do have to pick up a weapon for whatever reason, like, do you have to give it your all? And I didn't even realize like what was going through my mind in its entirety. But my wife came in and I heard her screaming. It's like, okay, so it says AC Bergen Fisher on the screen. People in real life, they call me Tony. Okay,
okay.
the AC is it's like my first name is actually Anthony, which I hate, which is
Mhm.
why I shorten it. But I hear my wife's voice, like it's almost like it's coming from like super far away, though I can see her. She's in the same room, she's screaming, Tony, Tony, Tony. And I stopped. I'm like, what's going on? She says, what are you doing? And I just told her, oh, I had this question. I was like, just trying to figure out. And she's like, do you have any idea what you look like right now? And it's like, no. I was like touching my face, like, oh my God, my cheeks are wet. What is this salty discharge?
Mhm.
Like, I didn't realize. I was like
Right.
bawling my eyes out, like while having this breakthrough. And it's like ever since then, it's like I started looking at things very, very differently about childhood, because I had always made excuses. I always wondered, like, why is my dad so apologetic? Why is he trying to make things right? It's like he wasn't abusive. He was just a normal dad, like I got spanked, you got spanked, we all got spanked, not
Right.
a
We
big
got
deal.
spanked. Right.
And I realized, wow, this is the reason why like the school called the social worker. This is the reason why, like, before we got disciplined, all the windows and doors got closed. The neighbors wouldn't hear us scream. This is the reason why, like, blah 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 blah. He was hiding the
Hmm.
abuse.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
It's
like really
no, no,
really like ramped up on this particular topic right now because I've
no.
had
You're
like a
good.
couple of recent breakthroughs, and it just like
Hmm.
I get so angry I could dig up my dead father and strangle him right now, even though like
Yeah.
we did a lot of work. By the time he passed away, we were like literally best friends. Like
Yeah.
the guy who had raised me was not the guy that we buried. It
Right.
just it's weird. But anyways,
And
I'm
it's
I'm
weird how
struggling
like
right now.
no, no, you're good. You're good. And it's like I sometimes it's like I see the dad my in my situation, I see the dad who was and who the dad I wanted to be. So I had a hard time combining the two people. So like in my mind it was split. There was this good loving charismatic dad that was like my best friend, and there was the dad that was my abuser. And so my whole adult life up until like my early 30s, I was just ignoring that abusive side. Like you said, making excuses. He didn't know better. He was under a lot of stress, all this, that, and the other. And then things started coming back through therapy. And I was like, oh my God, no, he knew better. He knew what he was like. He knew better. He could have done better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was and it's hard to like. kind of combine those two images in my, it was hard for me to combine the two images, really realizing the person who I wanted him to be wasn't really who he was. It was really the person who he is. And that's whenever I wrote him that letter that I talked about on your show. And then he was just like, you're not worth it, kind of thing. And now he's trying to get back in my life. He's like sending me messages, oh, let's work this out. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with this, because I don't know if I can trust you yet. And so, and I'm rambling on myself, because it's just very, it's just, it just sucks. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
really sucky thing to deal with. And it's so crappy that even as adults, like, I get to a place where I'm like, I should be over this by now. This should not bother me. I'm too old for this. This has been like, 20, 25, 30 years ago. This needs to stop. And then something happens. Like I said, it sets me back. I'm like, this is why I'm in therapy still. This is why
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of therapy. Like, get as much therapy as possible. Like, I've been in therapy for like decades. I'm
Yes.
still a complete mess, but I'm way less of a mess now.
Right. I'm a little more of an organized mess now. Like, I can kind of, I'm a little more compartmentalized in a healthy way. I'm
Well, at
not
least you know
just,
what you need to do with the piles of stuff under the rug, right? Like,
exactly. That's exactly it. So I know that you told me that you were a preacher. You went into the ministry at some point, right? So tell me about that. I'm really curious about that. Like, Pastor Tony, or Preacher Tony. I'm really curious about
okay,
this.
so my dad was an ordained minister.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I for a number of years I was what was be classed as a missionary kid. Like, our family moved to South America. My dad was born in Paraguay, and
Mm-hmm.
he felt a calling to return to the country of his birth as, a minister, to do whatever it is that missionaries do, which is fine. So as a family, we got brought along with that. It was like, in many ways a wonderful experience. I don't want to like take away from that, but I mean, I did get to see like different sides of my dad. The abuse had slowed down somewhat when he was sort of more in his natural habitat and away from like the strong influence of the Pentecostal church, which is why I
Mm-hmm.
started to realize, like, at that point, I think I was in my teens anyways when we moved, early teens. Started noticing, wow, you take this guy away from the toxic influences, he stops being such a toxic guy. This is more like the dad I remember from the Baptist church. I mean, he still had
Mm-hmm.
like that bit of an edge to him that would come up, but for the most part, he was easy to get along with. Um, I did go along with him out into the middle of nowhere on several like little missions trips. Him and I
Mm-hmm.
built a church together, like the two of us by hand. Um, I got a real positive taste for like what it's like to, in church lingo, like, minister to people.
Mm-hmm.
I love going into a place and it's like you're not showing up just with a box of Bibles. You're showing up with like a truckload of food and a couple of Bibles in there. You're helping people, like, you know simple stuff, helping them dig a new outhouse. You're helping them, you know learn about hygiene. You're seeing people that like are introduced to like proper nutrition, who had been like physically blind before, see their eyesight become restored. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it, it seemed nothing short of miraculous, right?
Right.
And I something woke up in me, and I kind of wanted, like, I decided that, like, at some point in life, I wanted to have a taste of that for myself. I didn't want to be like following my dad around, like helping him with his work. I had my own ideas about what kinds of people were, kind of like exciting to me, the kind of people that I wanted to work with, I wanted to help. But I mean, when you have a chance to be a part of like a meaningful missions trip of any kind, whether it's big or small, like, it's a
Mm-hmm.
captivating and intoxicating experience, and you just want more of it.
It is.
And so that had always sort of stuck in my head. There was a period like in my early 20s where, we at this point we had moved back to Canada, where I had sort of like, as the church people would say, I'd backslidden, because I was starting to come to terms with some difficult childhood memories. Of like realized that like everything ugly that had ever happened in life happened as a result of my parents' religious affiliation, and I just kind of like didn't want a whole lot to do with it. I still had my beliefs, but I distanced myself from like any form of like I hate the term organized religion because religion by nature is organized, but
Right.
I started to shy away from like any form of like organized religious gatherings. I had no
Hmm.
problem like being around religious people so long as they also were distancing themselves from organized religious gatherings. And more and more it just seemed like the whole church thing wasn't a fantastic fit for me anymore. But I still like
Right.
I had these beliefs that I wasn't really sure what to do with. I think I went through seasons of like strongly believing, other seasons of like I don't know if I believed or if I was just afraid not to believe, you know, which
Yeah.
it's a form of belief. It's kind of like a toxic one, but it is definitely a belief, right?
Right.
And then I mean, this really isn't probably the show to get too far into it, but I mean, there's like always been cycles of like estrangement in my family, and through one of those periods of estrangement, like I always had like a difficult relationship with my mom up until the last couple of years, and it was just
Hmm.
one of those seasons of estrangement where it's like I for whatever reason I had to put a bit of distance between my mother and I hadn't spoken to her in several months. And my dad was he was one of those husbands where it's like whether his wife is right or wrong, he was going to side with her in public and he would take her to task in private. But as
Hmm.
far as anybody saw in the outside world, they were like in solidarity, which I'm still on the fence with whether I respect that or resent it.
Right. Yeah, I
but that was
understand
his
that.
choice. And
Right.
unfortunately it's like I couldn't handle my dad constantly nagging me about like reconciling with my mom. It's like, Dad, can't we just you and me don't have any problems, like at this point we really
Hmm.
didn't. It's like, why can't we just enjoy each other's company? Why does every conversation have to be about mom? It's like she treats you like crap too. Like honestly, I wish you would divorce her because I feel like you could do better. Like they didn't
Right.
have like the kind of relationship that I had a lot of respect for. I mean, what happened behind the scenes only they know. But from my narrow view, I figured my dad could do better and he should do better because I just
Right.
wanted my dad. I didn't want to deal with like all the nonsense with my mom
Hmm.
during this period, right? And so we went like it ended up being no contact with both mom and dad for a while. And my wife and I at the time we were out doing some, I don't know, we weren't shopping. I think we driven up to Whistler for the day, and it was just like this beautiful day in the mountains. We had a car with a convertible top, so it's mean like driving through the mountains on like a
Nice.
beautiful like it was one of those perfect spring days, where it felt like summer had come early, and it's like wow, we were like verging on sunburned and
Yeah.
just like on top of the world, spending the day in the sunshine with the wind blowing through. At the time, I had hair, and what's better than that?
Right.
And then I get home and there was a message on the answering machine. So I hit play because don't know what's going on. And it's like my younger sister had called and I could barely understand what she was saying. She's crying so hard. All I made out was something about dad having a tumor and he was going to die. And then click. I'm like, what the? I haven't talked to my parents.
Right.
Like my dad, like this can't be right. My dad isn't like a person who dies,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
this guy's larger than life. He's like he's immortal. I mean, this guy solves problems. He
Right.
just he can't. Like it's impossible. Like the guy's like in his like he's like 58 years old. Like
Hmm.
58-year-old men don't get cancer and die.
Right.
So I didn't know what to do. So again, we hop back into the convertible car. Now the sun's still shining. It's a very different experience. And my parents were living about an hour away from where we were living and pulled up and I see my dad sitting on the front steps of his house with my mom. And I guess the news was fairly fresh for them, but they were just trying to figure out as husband and wife, like we made vows like it was supposed to be until death do us part, but that's not supposed to happen yet.
Right.
And this is how I reconcile with my parents, is walking into this moment where I had no business being. Sorry.
No, you're good.
But it was a really difficult thing.
Yeah.
Um, 30 days later, we were putting him in the ground.
I'm so sorry.
And that was a tough 30 days between finding out that like this guy he was like I did an episode on Turn Up the AC called Constance, you know, where I talked about like there was the sun, there was the moon, there was my dad.
Right.
That's how permanent he was supposed to be. But then over the course of 30 days, I see this strong, healthy man turn into a skeleton with paper thin skin dragged over it.
Right.
I see him laying in bed with his t-shirt inside out because the seams hurt. There's this guy where it's like he was light as a feather. Son, I need to go for a walk. And I'd be carrying this guy that like used to carry me. And it's like, there's nothing to him. I could have been just carrying his clothes on a hanger. That's how light he was. You know, like you've seen um video and pictures of like concentration camp victims. Like this is what the guy turned into. And all of that to to lead, I guess, to the point of this thing of like how did I get
Yeah.
into the industry?
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw how his church took care of him during this time. You know, like his roof developed a leak, and somebody from the church caught wind of it. And the next day, there was, I still remember his name, Pastor Brian Olenek. He showed up with a crew of volunteers. Some person from the church had donated all the supplies. They didn't just patch the roof; they re-roofed the whole house.
Oh my goodness.
You know, and like that's like not a small undertaking.
Mm-mm.
People would show up with food, people would show up with money. It wasn't like, you know, people showing up, oh brother, can we pray with you? They were just so practical in their love. And it's like, holy crap, like this is not the kind of like Christian love I grew up around. Like these people are the real deal.
Right.
And it challenged everything I had been led to believe about what church people were all about. Because like this group of people, like any one of them, like you know, you hear that saying, well, they give you the shirt off their back. I mean, these people, they went a lot deeper than that, and there was no
Right.
hesitation. It wasn't the case, well, if you need prayer, call the prayer line. It's a case of like, look, like anything you need, like if it's like the cable bill, the gas bill, like whatever, like you can't pay your mortgage, like just let us know. Don't think that you're stuck on your knees dealing with this. There is actual like practical help available, and it just like that kind of outpouring of love. It's like I, I felt like that was as intoxicating and as captivating as that experience of like seeing those people like in Paraguay having their sight restored from having like
Yeah.
food fed to them, and I realized, you know what, like being you know, a man of the cloth, as they say, like a preacher, a minister, like a pastor,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. It's not all about like standing at the pulpit and like telling people like beat your children. It's not about like telling people they've got sin in their life. It's not even about like altar calls. It's not outreach. It's not all these things. Like well, I mean, it obviously involves all these things, right?
Right.
But it doesn't have to be your only focus. Like it's possible to go and you see somebody who's hungry and give them a sandwich and smile and nod and walk away. There doesn't have to be a sermon
Yes.
attached. You know,
Yes.
like some of the outreach programs for this church, I never thought of before. It's like there was another guy. I'm going to name drop these people because if their names get out, I think like they deserve like a little bit of recognition for the fact that they were willing to push the boundaries. Like Stephen Parker,
Mm-hmm.
he would go and talk to like prostitutes on the street. He wouldn't show up like, you know, suit and tie and like, hey, you need to stop disrespecting your body. He'd show up with like wet wipes and mouthwash and condoms. And
Mm-hmm.
he would sit and have a bit of a conversation with them. If they asked why he was doing that, he would say, like, well, that was his opportunity to say, well, you know, I feel compelled to do this because of the love of Jesus, whatever the case may be. If they didn't ask, he didn't volunteer it.
Mm-hmm.
He made friends with people like that. Same guy. It's like, you know, if he'd be dealing with like people that were struggling with alcoholism, he realized that you can't have a conversation about somebody's eternal soul when they've got the jitters because they need a drink.
Yes.
So he'd
That's
show up
so
with like a
true.
little like like, here's a bottle of whiskey, like we'll each sit here like sipping off of the same bottle and we'll have a talk about Jesus. And these people would show up in church the next Sunday and they would get sober and their lives would turn around. And it's like, I've never seen missionary work like this. Like,
Right.
this, it was crazy, but like in a beautiful, beautiful way. And it's just like, this church, I didn't know, like, are they the only church around that that does this,
Mm-hmm.
or is this like indicative of like what modern Christianity is turning into? Like, either way, it's like I had no reason to avoid this church. Anyways, we get to the end of my dad, you know, he passes away, and the whole family fell apart, and I realized that somehow at like 29 years old, I've become the patriarch of the family, and I'm not ready.
Yeah.
But part of my job as, like, you know, the patriarch of the family is funeral arrangements need to be made. I don't want to do this. Like, I want to go and sit in my dad's chair and I want to cry. I want to smell his sweaters. I want to like
Yeah.
sit
You just
in
want
the
to, you
like,
just want to grieve.
what's the thing? It's like simple things like sitting in the driver's seat of his car and like putting my hands on the steering wheel. And I know it was like the warmth of the sun that was on there, but it's like it felt like I was like holding my dad's hands. And like, it just like, these are all the little experiences I wanted, but I wasn't given the luxury because arrangements had to be made and people needed to be taken care of, and somebody had to be strong for my mom.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to like run my sisters down by saying they were useless, but I mean, like, they're wired emotionally very differently than I am. They didn't have the strength to muster up.
Right.
Like, all they knew how to do was like huddle in a ball with mom and like cry and blow snot bubbles and whatever it is that like emotional people
Yeah.
do. And
Right.
meanwhile, like, I'm going through the surreal experience of shopping for a funeral plot. I'm looking through casket catalogs. I'm trying to plan a service. It, like, and as much as like I felt like so tiny and so alone in all this, these people from this church, like, they made me feel like I was 10 feet tall. And again, it wasn't stuff like, oh brother, you know, we're here for you, we'll pray. Not like that empty call if you need anything. It's like they were there with the something
Right.
that I needed. They were there in every practical way. And a combination of them being just like, oh, sorry, I keep stopping my camera because I hate wiping my nose.
Oh no,
I keep
you're fine.
watering. um Everything about the experience was just so good, right? It's like it's not
Right.
just like these people are awesome. It's not like just this church is awesome. I realized like I'm actually very, very, very well supported in this place, and it's a wonderful place. And on top of it, like, being in this place in a way makes me feel very close to my father, because it was in a lot of cases both his friends and his critics from that congregation that were my biggest supports. You know, like, people would talk
Mhm.
to me and they say, wow, you know, like that look that just washed across your face, like, oh man, do I ever see Carlos there? And just the way I would think about things, you know, Sunday morning, like after the sermon, it's like the preacher would take something out of context, like, no, 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 no,
Right.
no. I'll be right up there and say, you know what? Like, I know you were trying to make a point, but you pulled that so far out of context, and like, there's people that are blindly following you. You can't do that. And
Hmm.
the pastor started laughing, and I'm thinking, why are you laughing at me? He says, your father used to do this every single Sunday without
Oh
fail.
my goodness.
And I kind of like stepped into his shoes in that congregation, and it's like
Mhm.
more and more and more, I felt like I was like in good ways becoming my father. In like other ways, I was just like getting close to him. I was learning a side of him that I hadn't experienced, because I mean, like, because of all my years away from organized church,
Mhm.
I hadn't attended with him. I didn't see what kind of Christianity he had started to practice. I didn't see that he had softened in his Pentecostal kind of beliefs. I mean, he still believed in a lot of this stuff, but he didn't have such an edge to him anymore, based on what I was learning from these people who had known him. And like I said, like, it was both his friends and his critics who had supported me. And like friends, you expect to have lots of good things to say about the dearly departed.
Right.
The critics, while they may have been in normal social circles obligated to be like more polite about things than normal, it's like the kind of ways where they would compliment him, it was almost like a compliment wrapped in an insult, which is why I believed like how true it was. I'd get
Mm-hmm.
little things like, oh man, when your father had something to say, it was like straight like an arrow. He would just shoot straight to the point. He didn't care what was in between. And like, I'm like that too. And like, I always wonder, where do I get this from? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll sort out the hurt feelings and the misunderstanding later. But right now I got to say what I got to say,
Right.
because I don't want to water down like the importance of my message by like choosing careful words. Hey, that was my dad. That was him at church, and one of the people who he had been closest to, who had been kind of like his spiritual mentor, was a man named Carson Jameson. Which again, I feel compelled to like name drop all these people, because even though I'm like 9 years removed from anything resembling religion, these people are still very important people to me.
Mm-hmm.
And Carson was just such like a wonderful, wonderful man. We had great conversations. He would like fill in the gaps about my dad. He had given my dad like a little bit of therapy. Um, Encouraged him to go and get like some proper mental health support. My father had gone to him and said, look, I've got like such huge regrets about the way I raised my kids, especially my son. I think he hates me. It was all these things. And I got to hear like what my father had struggled with, like even after I had forgiven him. He just, these struggles that he continued to have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy for somebody to pay you lip service directly, but when you hear from an independent third party, no, in fact, like these things actually did bother him. They bother him to the point where like he turned himself inside out trying to fix it. It just like, it made me realize that, okay, like he might have been like a crappy dad, like who raised me, but like as an adult, I didn't read him wrong. Like the guy was freaking awesome, and like he really
Mm-hmm.
was a loss.
Yeah.
But I mean, through all these conversations, Carson and I ended up being very close, and we started having conversations that were more theological in nature. And Carson had encouraged me. He said, like, you seem to have like a natural hunger for like the things of God. You seem to have a good base knowledge of things that are biblical, both in theological and in historical context. You've got a way of looking at things. You've got an understanding and appreciation of the scriptures that most people struggle to attain, and these things seem to come to you naturally. And whether they came to you through a cycle of abuse or not, like the fact is you're here now, you've got these powers, and like you've got these gifts, you don't want to waste them. And that was kind of like all I needed to hear, because I already had this underlying desire. I guess I was just sort of waiting for like somebody else to notice and say, you know what, I think you can do it. And so I
Right.
started going for theological training.
Mm-hmm.
I did eventually become an ordained minister. It wasn't really like the pulpit preacher kind of thing so much. I mean, I preached several times at Spanish church, because there was like a Spanish congregation in our
Mm-hmm.
church. It would just, I don't know. It had never been like my dream to sort of like be the guy standing at the pulpit, like in the spotlight on
Right.
a Sunday morning. I just sort of wanted to be like that community helper.
Right.
But ironically, through all of this like intense theological study, my inquisitive mind started waking up again, and I started having
Right.
like some fairly difficult questions. And I started like there was nobody anymore telling me, you know what, you can't follow these things through to their natural conclusion. There's nobody telling me the question's sinful. There was nobody getting in my way, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the answers I came up with were not answers that were compatible with sustaining my faith. And piece by piece,
Mm-hmm.
it started to just collapse under the pressure. I tried like desperately to bolster it back up. It's like, okay, well, I'm maybe the problem is I'm looking at these things like just too much inside the Christian bubble. Maybe I need to expand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's look at like Jewish theology. Let's see the messianic prophecies, how everything ties in. Let's like
Mhm.
dig into the surrounding history at this time. Maybe there's like some error in translation, some historical event, some different way of looking at things that's going to like make it easy for me to like keep on clinging to these beliefs. And the more places I looked, the more there was like, instead of little chips being taken off, the big chunks falling off, until
Mhm.
at the end of the day there really wasn't anything left.
Was there anything like like any like particular belief or something that was so significant that really was like the game changer for you? Or was it just
There
a
was a
bit of
lot of
everything?
game changers in all honesty. Like one of the first things that was like kind of like a wow moment for me that really got me looking at things super differently was I was in a conversation with somebody who was a Catholic, and I had expressed like concern with the differences with like Catholic beliefs versus Protestant beliefs. I kind of felt like Catholics were missing the point somehow. And
Mhm.
when this person had pointed out that actually Catholicism predates Protestantism and early
Mhm.
Christianity was actually more similar to Catholicism than it is to any modern Protestant denomination, I thought, no, that doesn't sound right. We're the
Mhm.
real Christians. I mean, every denomination is the real Christian, right?
Right. Exactly. We know the right answers.
And I
We
thought, man,
argue.
like if we can get like something that seemingly superficial so wrong, what else did we get wrong? I
Yeah.
dug into the messianic prophecies. I mean, had a lot of debates with Christians over the years whether or not I've interpreted those correctly, but to my understanding, I'm not satisfied that like Jesus fulfilled these prophecies.
Mhm.
Um, I started noticing there was like discrepancies between like what the Apostle Paul had to say and what Jesus had to say. I started looking into, there was a movement that was going around like sometime years ago. It was like there were people calling themselves the red letter Christians. It's like they ignored everything that wasn't in the red letters, like anything Jesus didn't
Yes.
say isn't
Yes, I remember
Christianity. It's
those.
like, you know what? Well, why is that? And I started looking at why that was. Like, wow, Jesus and Paul like kind of were telling different stories about the way life is supposed to be lived. How is that? And I realized like how much of Christianity, it doesn't really have a lot to do with Christ. It has a lot to do with Paul.
Oh, 100%. A
That
lot of
that
it is
was like,
based on the Pauline doctrines.
and that's
Yes.
hugely problematic for me. I mean,
Mhm.
that was another like big like aha moment. Another one was looking into the Gnostic Gospels, because those cover
Mhm.
like the missing years of Jesus's life that are like in the Gospels, right? It's like, okay, you got like baby Jesus, you got adolescent Jesus, and then you got like dude hanging out with
Year-old
12
Jesus.
of his
Yeah.
buddies Jesus, right? It was like,
Right.
what
Right.
happened in between? Like, I had
Mhm.
questions, and the Gnostic Gospels did a reasonable attempt at like answering these questions. um I started looking into like history. It's like, okay, like the divinity of Christ. I mean, that's kind of a big deal. That's like
Mhm.
right at the backbone of modern Christianity. Like if Jesus isn't
Right.
God, then you're wasting your time, I think.
Right.
And I realized that the divinity of Jesus wasn't even like established until like 480 AD in the Second Council of Nicaea,
I was about
where
to say
like
the
a group
Council of
of like
Nicaea,
religious
right?
elders got together and they're like, you know what? Let's do it this way, which again was tied back into this like exploration of the Jewish doctrines. It's like, but God can't take on human form. That is like impossible according to Judaism. Christianity
Mhm.
is not separate from Judaism. Christianity is meant to be the continuation of it. So how can the continuation be like incompatible with the base theology? It was just like
Mhm.
all these things. It was like popcorn at a certain point. It's like every time I turned around, what, here's another thing that I can't make sense of. And by the time I was done removing all the things that didn't work, because I mean, like I think you and I have talked about this a couple times. So like all Christians, whether they like to admit it or not, they're cherry picking the scriptures.
Yes,
They're ignoring the
absolutely.
things they don't like, and they're grasping onto the things that they do like.
Right.
But by the time I was done removing all the things I didn't like or that didn't work or that I couldn't make sense of, what I was left with was basic humanism.
Mhm.
Like um even like really simple things. It's like, here's a really stupid like big thing. The golden rule:
Yeah.
do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like that on the surface seems like it should be no problem, until I realized like, wow, what a narcissistic take on things. I can't
It
even
really
agree with
is.
that. It's like, I'm going to do unto others as they would have me do unto to them. It's like, I can't treat you the way I want to be treated. What if there's something horribly wrong with me and I like the abuse? I can't just assume that you want to be abused too.
Yes.
This gives me incentive like to get to know you as a person. Like I get to know Amber. It's like, wow, okay, Amber is a lot of things that I'm not. And that is like, I think by nature going to wake up a different side of me. It's like I'm not being
Hmm.
inauthentic with you, but I'm approaching you on
Right.
a level that works for us. I can't
Right.
do that if I'm following the golden rule.
Exactly. Yeah. I find that I think that you know how the Jesus said that we're supposed to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. I actually did like a thing on my Facebook page about this. It dawned on me one day that the reason we treat each other just so bad is because we hate ourselves. We're so self-deprived. Like we treat ourselves, we look at ourselves like evil, rotten human beings to the core. So
Yeah.
we can't love other people properly because we hate ourselves. Like there's this whole thing that just does not make sense. Like we're supposed to be this certain way towards other people, but we can't have the same grace for ourselves. Like it's just like this light bulb went off in my head, kind of like the golden rule for you. And I'm like, that
Mm-hmm.
whoa, that doesn't compute. This isn't right. It doesn't make sense to me. So, but sorry, that was like just total tangent off on the side. But it's funny
No,
how if
it's
you
not on the
actually
side.
sit
It's like
back.
the same exact kind of thing. And one of the things I found like the most interesting when we originally started talking is how we had such similar like um experience in the sense of like unpacking our faith. What does it mean? What is it made of? And like how we ended up in kind of like, I know you said like we're on like opposite poles as far as beliefs. I don't really feel like that's the truth. I think like we differ on one key belief, and that's
Yeah,
like
that's true.
the existence of a God. But I feel like our politics, our social policies, all these things are very, very much in line.
Yeah,
It just
that's
like
true.
we ended up like coming to a different conclusion about like one fairly important question, which is like, does a God exist or does it not?
Right. I mean, it's just a small, tiny, minute thing, but like you said, I mean, we are pretty similar in a lot of other things. That's just the one thing, and I'm glad we don't hate each other because we disagree on that one thing. Because they're actually pretty
No,
cool.
no, it's I don't know. And then I learned how easy it is to coexist when you've got different like God beliefs from other people. Is like I'm a practicing Buddhist, like I'm a non-theistic Buddhist.
Mhm.
It's like more of a philosophy than a religion as I understand it. But I mean, there are also people who are theistic Buddhists. They do believe in supernatural. They do believe in gods and devils and reincarnation and like things that I don't subscribe to. And for
Mhm.
them, it is more of a religion. But I realized, like, man, we've got like so many like key beliefs that are in line with each other. Like, why are we going to get hung up in the differences?
Right.
And you know, like you'd mentioned being on one of my podcasts, like what I like about you. The foundational premise of that show is that all of us have more in common than we have in conflict, and it's something like that is a thought that I've spent a lot of time meditating on like the last 2 years. I realized that like it doesn't matter how drastically different two people appear on the surface, underneath it all we are functionally more or less the same. I mean, we all
Mhm.
want the same things out of life. We all want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to be well adjusted. We want to feel safe, you know, things like this.
Mhm.
Where the problem comes in is in the differences in how we approach achieving these goals. And unfortunately, we get so hung up in um, observing differences in methodology that we don't take the time to appreciate that, like, you know, we're chasing after the same exact things, and that maybe
Mhm.
instead of like me looking at you and thinking, well, you're like really effed up because you go to church and you pray,
Right.
whereas like I'm like more focused on practical problem solving. Maybe the healthiest approach is like some hybrid of the two. Whereas, like, instead of me sitting here intellectualizing everything and stressing myself the hell out, maybe I need to take a pause and, like, whether or not I'm praying to somebody, just speaking my problems out loud
Right.
and acknowledging to self, you know what, I'm overwhelmed right now. I don't know what to do. I need help. I need guidance. I need
Mhm.
reassurance. And then in that more centered frame of mind, okay, now I can sit here and think on a practical level, you know,
Right.
but like, and I do appreciate that about you. And I would like to think you appreciate about me
Oh,
too, like my different
absolutely.
approach,
Yeah.
We learn from
Yeah,
each other. We're
we
not
do.
like, I'm not trying to convert you to atheism, and you're not trying to convert me to Christianity. We're just
Mm-mm.
enjoying the beauty that is our friendship.
Right.
And I really do strongly believe that that's a possibility for any two people if they will give themselves to the experience.
Yes. And that's the problem though, is people get so hung up on these semantics and these ideologies that they are blinded from the humanity of the other person. That person becomes what they believe or what they don't believe, and it takes that humanity away. Whereas the approach I take is I want to see the humanity first. What they believe is just part of who they are. It's not who they are. There's so much more to a human being than just what God they believe in or they don't believe in, or what
Mm-hmm.
how they pray or how they meditate. Because we're all very complex beings. We're all just here trying to survive this life. And some of us have a better hand in it than others, but at the end of the day, like you said, we all want the same thing, and how we get there is just sometimes different ways. Because I have one friend who um very strong agnostic, and she believes in the existence of aliens and that we came from aliens. And she thinks, whenever we first met, she's like, "You're insane for believing in God." And I'm like, "Well, aren't you believing in something too? I mean, we both have faith. Mine is
Yeah.
just in one, and yours is in a multiple, like almost like a multi, like a pantheon type of ideology because of aliens coming down and all this stuff." I'm like, "We both believe, so why can't we just have this friendship because we both believe in something?" And it's grown into a really beautiful friendship. We both still don't believe the same, but we can have conversations with each other, and I'm not mad at her. She's not mad at me. It's just who we are. I started rambling again. I ramble too, so I just get on
No,
this
it's
thing
okay.
going.
Like, it was actually occurred to me that the first time we ever chatted, we had scheduled, I think, like a 15-minute chat just to see if you were going to be a good fit for my podcast. And
Yes,
we ended up like going on and on for like an hour and 15.
we did. We really did. That was so fun. That we had the best time, and it's it's been very refreshing. I really appreciate your approach to all of it. And I love that you're very interactive and stuff that I put up, because I like that people on my page see an opposite opinion of what their echo chamber is. And I love that people get challenged. And it cracks me up when people get triggered, because they're just like, oh my God, there's an atheist on here. Let's convert the atheist. And I'm just like, stop, leave him alone. Just let
It's
him.
hard, like with the written word too, because it's like anybody who takes the time to talk to me realize like I'm not really that hard of a person.
You're
But
not.
when I'm interacting with people like in a comment thread, I know that my words, it's like when I read them the next day, sometimes like, ooh, that sounded a bit edgier than I wanted, because you lose inflection, you lose tone of
You
voice, and it's
do.
like, you know what? I'm not one of those people to delete comments. Like, okay, well, whatever, it's out there.
It's out there. Yeah.
Um, if you want to know what I'm all about, like, I've podcasted up a storm the last several years, so my personality is out there if you want to get like a real taste of it. And if you're really, really
Hmm.
pissed off, I'm happy to like chat with you on the phone and sort things out. Even if you just want to tell me I'm a complete a-hole, like whatever it takes to help you get along, like, I'm open to it. Because I've often said,
Yeah.
like I would rather like have somebody sincerely tell me to F off than to like insincerely tell me you're great. I don't
Right.
trust that. I value honesty
No.
above all other
Hmm.
things.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I would rather it be you just tell me straight up how you feel about whatever it is I'm talking about or what I'm doing, than to be passive aggressive and pussyfoot around the situation and be insincere. I hate insincerity. Like, I think everybody does. That's like a really stupid way to say that. But I, growing up in the world that we grew up in, there was so much just lip service all the time. It was always just the words. The actions never followed what the words were, ever.
Right.
And so it made me have a strong distaste for people who cannot be honest with themselves and honest with me. And
Well, it's a
I
safety
struggle
thing. You
with
need to
that.
be able to trust people, right?
Yes. And if you're not safe, then you're not going to get I'm not going to open up to you. You're not going to get the onion layers peeled back. I am a very layered person. I have a lot of parts to my personality, which you've seen bits and pieces of my personality.
Mm-hmm.
And but if you're not safe, you're just going to be stopped, hard stopped right there. It's going to be okay. You're going to get the nice side of me. You won't get that samurai sword quite yet, but don't push me too far, or that might happen. But I don't even know where I was going with that. I just ran off on a tangent.
It
I just
happens.
got it happens. But I'm so thankful that we just stumbled across each other and have been able to kind of develop this friendship. It's been challenging for me too, because I appreciate your feedback, because it helps me, because I like to critically think, which I know from an atheistic standpoint, it probably sounds funny because I still believe in God, that I want to critically think, but it helps me go, like, because you pointed out to me, all Christians cherry pick, and I'm like, wait a second, he's right. We do cherry pick. Even I still cherry pick stuff, and I had to be. But the thing is I no longer am like, I don't cherry pick. This is what the Bible says. I acknowledge the fact that there are things that I cherry pick out of the Bible, and there's things that I don't want to talk about, but I will if I need to. Does that make sense? I'm just like, because I'm
No,
rambling.
no,
I'm
it
rambling
makes
again.
perfect sense because I mean, even like on my end of things, it's like I'm not like dogmatic about my atheism. And if you raise a point and like you challenge like one of my positions, I'm happy to acknowledge that I'm wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something that I've really learned to value the last few years. I've spent a lot of time working on it actually, is appreciating the experience of being wrong. Because when I tell you, like, you know what, I'm wrong, that's like me like slapping a big button on myself that says, I learned something today. And
Yes.
what's wrong with that?
Yes. Right. And it's part of the human experience. And if we're supposed to be ever evolving and growing, we have to be willing to acknowledge that we're wrong, and that our
Mm-hmm.
ideas need to be fluid and ever changing. Like the way I believed 10 years ago is not how I believe now. And my hope is that I continue to grow, and in the next 10 years I'm in a different spot in my belief, and I'm even more open-minded and more loving and a much better well-rounded person than I am now. And that's what I think we should do. And the problem I find with fundamental Christianity especially is you're stuck in this box, and you cannot grow. You cannot be anything other than what is this parameter. And that stunts a lot of people. And I think that's why there's a lot of people who cannot properly debate their beliefs. They can't talk about their beliefs without getting
Mm-hmm.
angry, because they don't know how. They have never been given that space to grow, or even know how to interact with people who don't believe with them, because we're not allowed to talk to the outside world without
No, and
converting them.
I think there's hope for anybody too. Because I mean, like one more person
Mm-hmm.
I really need to give a shout out to is my mother.
Mm-hmm.
Is she like was always for me like an example of what happens when a person gets stuck in dogma and gets stuck in belief. But the last couple of years, holy crap, that woman surprises me every single time we talk. She's become so open-minded and so like just genuinely decent. um it wouldn't even occur to her anymore to like weaponize her Christianity, and she used to like
Mm-hmm.
beating people over the head with the Bible basically, and now it's just like
Yeah.
when I look at like some of the friends that she's got, like she was friends for a couple of years with like out and out pagan who just like very very different spiritual beliefs. She's got a friend who's like a Muslim, who's like one of her best friends now. She
Mm-hmm.
sees this woman, like, kisses her on the cheek, just like they celebrate the fact that they both believe in something bigger than themselves instead of thinking, well, no, you believe in the wrong God. You call him by a different
Mm-hmm.
name. You pray differently. You like it just these are not things that occur to her anymore. And if an 80-year-old woman, like going on 81, can open up her mind, then I think like people that are kind of like in your age group or my age group, they don't have the excuse of being stuck in their ways. It's like anybody, a dog
Mm-hmm.
of any age can literally learn new tricks. And
Yes.
I just want to encourage like everybody who's listening, like whether you're a person of faith or a person of not,
Mm-hmm.
take the time to like hear out like things that maybe you don't agree with. And like I maybe it's a weird thing like when talking about being open-minded with people and their beliefs, because like I try to like believe as few things as possible and know as many things as possible. But that being said,
Right.
we cannot avoid the fact that we all believe something without great reason.
Mm-hmm.
or at least not like justifiable reason by other people's standards. And
Right.
if we want people to appreciate like our positions that we can't explain per se, we kind of
Hmm.
got to give them a little bit of wiggle room to like have beliefs that they can't explain to our satisfaction too, and just think, you know what, like I hear where Amber's coming from. This is important to her. I don't understand it
Hmm.
fully. Maybe like, you know, I don't understand this the how you can enjoy certain types of foods, right? To me, they're
Right.
icky. To you, they're delicious. Isn't it enough
Right.
for me to see the look of satisfaction on your face when you eat a pickle? You know, like
Right. Yeah, and I mean, and I can also attest to, like, with my own mom, the because she was so steeped in the dogma and the legalism, and now she's like a totally different human being. Like she, after she left my dad, she just pulled away and started really rebuilding herself, and like all these things that mattered so much don't matter anymore. She's like so soft and like kind and open-minded and loving, and it's like we have like a really good relationship now in comparison to my entire life. Like she's like my
yeah,
best friend type of thing. And it's true, you can change at any age. You just have to, you know, be willing to challenge yourself. And it's scary. It is scary to challenge what you've been taught, especially whenever it comes to religious stuff, because there's always that looming guilt and thought in your mind, you're going to go to hell because you're changing, you know, that, you know, alcohol in the Bible is actually alcohol and it's not grape juice. You know, now you're going to
weird.
hell for it, right? And it's, you know, like even the people that I know that are like really dogmatic still, and like they believe in the earth is flat, like this whole thing, like there's a whole thing there. And I'm just like, you know what, you can believe that. You're not hurting me with your belief. We can still agree to disagree. It's fine. We can still be friends. But it's hard. So hard. So I can't say, I can't talk. Oh my gosh. It's hard though, because a lot of times people still in that dogmatic belief, they don't want to budge. And it's hard for me not to get high and mighty in myself and my self growth, going, well, look how far I've come. Why can't you do this too? It makes me like aggravated, and I'm like, I need to calm myself down. It took me a long time to get here.
Yeah.
And I also had therapy. I had a lot of therapy and a lot of outside worldviews coming in to change my worldview. And not a lot of people have that privilege or that ability to do that. And I have to like kind of give grace where grace is due, I guess, using biblical terms. So I rambled again. I was like, I need to stop. This isn't my
We're
interview. It's
both really
yours.
really good at that, I think.
We are.
There's a danger in loving the sound of your own voice, you know?
It is. Oh my gosh. But I will tell you that I have realized how annoying I can be whenever I'm talking and I'm editing myself. I'm just like, oh my gosh. I have like these weird tics and these things that I do. And I'm like, I need to stop. And I say, and all the time. I'm like editing out those two
It's the
words.
best thing
Of,
about recording yourself, though. You learn so much about how you communicate.
yes.
Like,
Oh
well, you
my
know my brother
gosh.
Jason, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
him and I, like our relationship only got really good after we started recording ourselves talk, because we started doing a podcast years ago and we ended up having an argument while the mic was still on, and we recorded the whole thing, and we listened to it like a couple months after the fact. And you know, like in the heat of the moment, you think like, no, I'm justified and so is being a douchebag. And then you listen back
Yes.
once you've like sort of emotionally removed, it's like, oh no, I was the douchebag.
Right. Right.
But that's probably like a complete aside here. But I mean, it happens too.
But
Like, but it's good. We'll
it
both
does.
like. I think for all this camera and microphone time that we put in over the years, we should eventually become just fantastic examples of how to present in public.
Right. This is my hat. This is my public face right here. You don't have to see the other side. You don't have to see the pajama pants I have on down here because I only got dressed from here up.
Yeah, I'm
That kind
like
of
that's what I
thing.
do on camera too. Is like I call it going straight Winnie the Pooh, right? You just dress from the top half, and the bottom half you're naked.
Yes. I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed that like they're like, yeah, I'm just wearing a shirt right now. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I don't really blame you because I would too.
It's like, but once you
But
picture it, you can't unpicture it, right?
Right? Like that thought never leaves your mind after that. You're like, is that person naked and on the other side of that camera?
Yeah,
But
you keep
that
hoping they're
is
gonna
a
like adjust themselves in their
oh no,
chair.
oh wait, excuse me. On that note, my dear friend, we are coming up on an hour and 20 minutes, and so we're going to wrap it up here. I have so appreciated you coming on and talking to me. Where can people find your podcast? And I can link that stuff down below if they want to kind of look you up.
Best way to find anything is just find me on Facebook. There's links to everything on my Facebook profile, and I will make sure I send you a link to that if you need
Yeah,
to do whatever you do with. And yeah,
awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you guys for taking the time to listen today. And I really appreciate it. And if, like I said, if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe and ring the notification bell. If you have your own story you would like to share, please contact me. The information how to do that is in the description box below. And until next time, my friends, everyone has a story. What is yours?